Welcome to the High Performance Hockey Podcast. Today we're joined by Director of Human Performance at Holy Name Medical Center in Teaneck, New Jersey, and the former Performance Director of the New York Rangers, Reg Grant. Reg spent 25 years in the field of elite athlete performance development, reconditioning, rehabilitation, which includes 17 years as the head strength and conditioning coach for the New York Rangers. In that role, Reg guided the team through the explosion in evaluation, training, tracking, and analytics by developing a comprehensive program targeted at improving athletic performance, managing recovery, and implementing strategies to reduce the risk of injury. Reg also spent 6 years as the president of the Strength and Conditioning Association of Professional Hockey, which included assisting in the development of the current National Hockey League Combine. Reg is a certified strength and conditioning specialist through the NSCA, holding a distinct RSCCE, which is reserved for those members who have spent at least 20 years in elite strength and conditioning. Reg is also certified athletic therapist from the Canadian Athletic Therapists Association, which enables him to bring a unique vision and insight to the merger of the medical development and performance fields. A really unique and insightful conversation by Reg today. In the podcast, we speak about his career in high performance, specifically 17 years with the New York Rangers, the lessons he learned, the observations that he made, the mistakes that he made. We also chat about the Combine. What is the Combine? What's an elevator pitch that we would use to describe what the Combine is? And finally, his role as the president of the Strength and Conditioning Association of Professional Hockey and what that encompassed during his time that he sat in that position. Fantastic podcast. Welcome in. Welcome to the podcast, Reg. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. You've had a storied career in the National Hockey League, 17 years, New York Rangers, 2002 through 2019. I think two things. Unbelievable in terms and measures of the experience, 17 years, and all with the same club. That's kind of rare, is it not?
It's exceptionally rare. And there's a whole group of guys that came together, I guess, got into the league somewhere in the 2001, 2002 through about 2006 or 7 timeframe. And so right about now, if you go through the league with San Jose, Vancouver, Nashville, different clubs, their guys have been there for quite some time. And prior to that, it was kind of hit or miss. You might have somebody there for 2-3 years at different clubs. And the interesting thing, when I came to New York, there was, let me tell you a little story. Sorry, I'll go off script a little bit on this.
Absolutely.
When I came to New York, there were 4 guys in 5 years in that role.
Wow.
So I walked into a situation. I'd never been to New York City. I thought I might visit it, one time in my life, and I end up being there for a while. And then I find out how the turnover had occurred. I think I kept my Quebec license plates on my car for a year, just to make sure everything would be okay.
Oh, man. Looking back again, a little bit off script in our questions, but what did you feel the secrets were to long-term success? Was it elite communication? Obviously, you have to know what you're doing. Were there soft, hard skills that you thought really sustained that position for so long?
Empathy, and you have to care about the people you're with, like 100% without question. There are people that come and go. There are lots of challenges that happen, but it really revolves around, do you care about the people that you're with and what you do? To get in, as you said, there's a certain level, you have to know what you're doing in a certain way, but it is all people and how you deal with them. When you find people that think they have everything figured out, they're usually not long for that world. When they're open to expanding and changing and learning and absorbing and adapting, then usually you've got a chance. But hands down, what kind of empathy do you have and how do you care about people?
And I don't know, maybe it's just I'm getting up there in age as well. I don't have the career like you, but almost 20 years now. And it seems as though it's just the older and older you get, the more you realize how important those skills are. I don't know if they're soft skills. I think they're hard skills. Communication and empathy, and being able to build a culture and being able to create something like that is something that I think Maybe as an early practitioner, it was all about reps and sets and periodization models. But I can tell you now, I think the past 10 years of my life in terms of high performance, it really comes down to being able to deal with people and being able to have them believe in something, right?
That is it entirely, because the goal is to get people to do things that they necessarily don't know why they're doing them, or that they're good for them to some degree. Some people are really dialed in. They understand they need to work. But there's things that we do that we experiment with, and that's all a part of understanding the athlete, understanding the sports and the demands. And if we can translate and get them to buy into this is what we're doing, trust us, and there's a good reason for it, and here's why. If they believe in us and trust in us in the process, and that is entirely dependent upon that relationship that you have. But if they have that, they're pretty much going to do anything, and they will. And if you know what you're doing, and you're truthful and you're honest and you really care about what's going on, then you've got a shot. Because the best program in the world doesn't mean anything if it gets applied incorrectly.
Yeah,
it really doesn't. So when people grow in the profession, there is a lot of science, there's a lot of numbers, there's a lot of algorithms, there's those things exist and there's a reason for them. But if the athlete walks in and something happened to their family member or a close loved one, if something happens, it's going to be all over their face. Their body language is going to be different, and if you don't address that, you're just going to push them down into some place, and it's not going to be the same. When the right thing to do is immediately get connected to that athlete. What's happening? What's going on? Where are you? Their internal chemical reactions are not going to let them get under a bar and lift max weight. Not in that situation. So if it's a heavy leg day and something happened in their life, you got to adjust. You have to figure out how to adapt to that type of thing. It all comes down to that communication, being transparent, open, and honest, and really, really caring about the things that are happening and impacting their lives.
Absolutely. Take us back, if you would. Walk us through your first year with the New York Rangers. You came in at a time where, I don't want to say turmoil, perhaps that's the wrong word, but there was change. Coming in as year one, what were your goals year one? What mistakes did you make along the way during this process?
So pretty much like anybody, early on when you get in there, you want to be there. You're just, oh man, you just want to be in. You're like, I want the job. You applied for it. You went through all the interviews. You did all the stuff. You jump in. You're gung ho. What can I do? And you want to make an impact with it. And I learned very quickly that it was not my place to walk in and make an impact. It was my place to walk in, to be observant, to learn, to pay attention to what was around me, to find the opportunities where I could make a positive change in some way. It was not my place to go in and be a big ripple through that pond. Jim Ramsey, I worked with for a long period of time. I'll give you this little story. There's many stories I can leave you with about Rammer. Nobody calls him Jim. It's all Rammer. But one of the key things that he mentioned, that he brought to me and helped teach me, is that you want to be an energy giver, not an energy taker. Any environment that you are in, you want to add to it in a way where you're invisible to the people that are around you. You're not an impediment to the process, because it's not about you. It's about the players and the team. And then as you go through that, you help feed their energy and get them built up, whatever that might be. So when I walked in to my first year, I was going in there. I got in with Glenn Sather, a legend in the sport, an absolute legend. And I said, okay, Glenn, here I am. I'm here. And what do you want me to do? And where do I start? And he goes, make sure they're fit. And I looked around and I'm going, Mark Messier, Brian Leach, Pavel Bure, Eric Lindros, Mike Richter. I mean, it's a long list and it keeps going. And I'm like, make sure they're fit. These guys know how to play pro hockey. They've been in the league for a long, long time. So I flipped and switched gears. I became a sponge. That really was it. And I walked in and I said, what are you guys doing? How are you doing it? How can I learn? What's kept you here? What do you like? What don't you like? And they looked at me and they're like, wait a minute, you're not telling me what to do? I'm like, no, I'm trying to learn. Like, you guys, in some cases have been in the league 15 plus years. Like, tell me what it is that helps you. What makes you feel good when you come to the rink? What doesn't? And there was a select group of guys, that were like, no, you know what? Just tell me what to do. Like, I'm coming in here. they were rookies themselves, and they're like, just help me out. And so, I would go in and I'd help, design the programs for those one or two guys. And then I'd learn the programs of the other guys. Mm-hmm. And then I'm an athletic therapist as well. So my background bridges both that, sort of athletic therapy, which to a US market, athletic therapy from Canada is a hybrid of an athletic trainer and a physical therapist. So we would do all that immediate emergency work in the long-term rehab. So I had a good connection with Rammer. And so he would send guys coming in, that might come out of the medical room a little bit sooner than they would have if the strength and conditioning space was just simply a training performance realm. So we had a lot of that reconditioning happening. And by doing those small daily interactions, guys are like, well, actually, he might know what he's doing. So there was, a little bit of that, and it grew over time. And we ended up in a spot where each year we had a development camp, and I got the guys that came right out of the draft, as well as guys that were, 1 or 2 years past that. And that was kind of a playground where I got to, show a little bit more of my thoughts towards how do you build a development? How do you take somebody that really doesn't have a background if they're coming out of junior hockey, or does coming out of collegiate hockey, but they're playing half the games. And how do you take that and, develop a foundation? What are the things that are important and foundational for a development system where, you're trying to get somebody to a high level of sport? So that was my playground. And over time, the guys that were at that development camp, I'm going to jump ahead a couple of years, but the guys that were at those development camps, they became the core of the team when we went to the Stanley Cup Finals.
Wow.
So it had a bit of an evolution to it. But to go back on that first year, really, I went in and I tried to figure out how to help. I listened, I asked a ton of questions, and how can I help? That was really the main theme.
It sounds like this idea we've talked about in the podcast before. Coaching is a lot like parenting, although I'm not a parent, I'm an uncle. But, perhaps at a younger age, a directive approach is warranted, right? It's a top-down possibly, hey, this is what we're going to do and here's why we're going to do it. But as the person, the athlete ages, it's got to be much more of a cooperative approach. They've got to have their DNA or their fingerprints on that model, on that, because it does a couple things. Number one, it establishes buy-in. Number two, you push ego to the side. And number three, you might argue that the perception of the program might be more important than the program itself.
Yes.
I mean, isn't that important? Those are all important.
At that time, we would have a group of young athletes, young men come in, and they walked into a room and said, okay, I want to be on this team one day. Here's the strength and conditioning coach for the club. Mm-hmm. I'm going to do whatever they tell me. Now, they're hoping the club has vetted me and that I have a clue what I'm doing, right? Sure. They're hoping that. But a lot of times you look at just general fitness industry situations where people, it's a performance center, but it's put up and its primary, purpose is it's got to make enough money to survive. Mm-hmm. And there might have been somebody that went through that's an elite level athlete that either got good because of what was done there or just happened to train there. Sure. And so now you've got young kids that come in and they're going, oh, wow, look at the jersey on the wall. That guy plays in the NFL, Major League Baseball, whatever, it doesn't matter. And this place must be the spot. Well, to all the parents out there that might eventually capture this podcast, it's important to pay attention to who the people are that your children are working with. And so the main thing for me is, even though there is that kind of blind faith for somebody that turns around and goes, oh, wow, you did work in the professional ranks. You are the one that's with the club. There's a lot of being humble that needs to occur to this process, mm-hmm. to understand that, there's a lot of work that needs to go into making sure something's effective for youth. And then as a kid, as you're going through and you're that young athlete, don't get blinded to just go to the place that has that pro athlete, because the program might be good for that individual, but there's a little bit of an art and a science to taking a program and making it effective for the youth.
100%. Let me ask you, that approach that you took with the Rangers, which to me is brilliant, just like you talked about at the start, empathy. Would you take that same approach today? You're a young strength and conditioning coach. You just got a head strength and conditioning position in the National Hockey League tomorrow. Would that be very similar to the approach you take today for a young coach?
Yeah, 100%. And here's part of the reason is that you're not in a vacuum. Your job is not to go in there and take each of those individuals and maximize speed, strength, bigger, faster, stronger. That is not your job. It might appear to be your job, but your job is to be an integral component to the success of that organization. If you're coaching an individual sprinter, an individual athlete in athletics, and that's all it is, a singular tennis player, and you don't deal with anybody else, and that's all that it is, all right, well, maybe there's some things there. However, I'd argue that even in those situations, there's that individual, there's the group of people that are around them, there's the support structure of medical staff that each of those individuals have. There is a whole multitude of people that are involved in that individual. And your goal is not to be just simply bringing, how do you get bigger, faster, stronger, and make all that happen and maximize that. Your goal is to integrate into the network and system that is there. So on an NHL club or think of any sport club, you need to integrate with the staff. You need to integrate with the coaches, management, with everybody that's a part of that building. When you walk in, as an example, you walk in Madison Square Garden, you don't walk in with nobody there. There's people working security, working the building, working around. There's people that are working, in facilities. So when you want to go run your fitness testing, you have to involve everybody in the building that deals with the ice. Absolutely. You want to run it in the off ice, you got to deal with those people. So that empathy and that approach, it needs to encompass everyone, because your effectiveness with the club is primarily driven by your effectiveness with the people around you.
So true. Speaking of that, I want to parlay it into our next portion of the question. Again, you're a young coach with the New York Rangers. You talked about testing. The first year, did you even test? And if so, I mean, we've talked to individuals before in terms of the podcast and head coaches as well. Look, if you're going to run a test for the first time, it's in the American Hockey League, or you're going to do it. You're not going to be quote unquote testing the test during training camp. You're a young strength and conditioning coach for the New York Rangers. How did you decide testing, or did you even test on ice? Was it just off ice?
No, it was all off ice. And initially what needs to happen is that it can't be the strength coach's test, if that makes sense. It can't be that. When you come in, you need to have something that is a complete, it's almost business-minded people do this all the time, is that when you go in, you need to be able to look at or have discussions with the top people that are there. So if it's the president that's involved, or they have the general manager, whoever that top person is, then they're the ones that you're having discussions with, so that it's the GM, the assistant GM, the coaches. What are we trying to do? What are we trying to accomplish? What do you guys want to see? All those discussions happen even before you pick the test. Then what is it that you want to be able to do? Now you start to go and figure out, well, look, we just need to understand that there's a base level of athleticism that these guys need to have. We need to put benchmarks in place so they know they have to train through the summer. We have value in it. We're a part of it. And we believe these things, in whatever way are true. And that's what we should do. So then they will come to the strength coach and say, what do you recommend? And it can be, maybe based on all the coaches going, I played in the NHL for a long period of time, and this is the test I did, and I like this one, I don't like that one. And you have a lot of that where you have to accept that and say, okay, well, here's why, and here's how we do it. And then from those discussions, then you start to tease out, well, look, we need to deal with how the body stabilizes itself, how it produces force, what its metabolic system is, how it can repeat things, what endurance capabilities are there. So when you go through all of that, then you start to come out to different tests. The benefit of development camps that we had is that we tested out any type of structure in our development camp. So when we ran something, we have ended up getting on ice. When we ran those, they were all done at development camp first. We vetted them there. We beat the ice up there. So everyone goes, isn't it great to do on-ice testing? Well, I can tell you that the first time I ran a certain on-ice test in a development camp, they went to the concrete. So I learned very quick.
Wow, just all the cut up ice and everything. Oh my goodness.
I learned very quick what it meant to adjust the pattern that you're working on. So if you're going to do a peanut, a figure eight, or whatever you want to call it, well, you better make sure that you adjust that, right? Because I thought, I had a coach that wanted people on ice, and it was the coach that drove the on ice, because I couldn't get on ice prior to this. When he came in, he said, we got to go on ice. We got to do that. Let's get him on ice. And it was a long test. It took 4 minutes.
Wow.
And I eventually shortened that down to 21 seconds. And I'm like, what's better than figure eights? Board to board, 21 feet. Let's explode across this. Let's get this thing going. Right. So they get out there and they're exploding. And I'm like, this is perfect. Look at this. It's got tight turns. It's got acceleration. It's got deceleration. There's the concrete. Okay, let's take a break. Let's move that over. So when I came back and I ran that for the first time, with the guys, the actual NHL guys, the ones that were running that were guys like Marian Gaborik and everything. I mean, these are guys that are producing immense force into the ice.
Sure.
So our practice facility had these hash marks all over the place. I was like, what is this? So in one section, there's 8 separate hash marks. Because when I ran 4 guys through a figure 8, all those 4 guys could only go on one section of ice. As soon as we did rep 2, it needed to be a new section of ice or we go straight to the concrete. Wow. So there's little bits of things that we adjusted over time. Anyway, I went off on a tangent.
No, but it's interesting. We spoke with Dan Pfaff earlier in a recent episode, and he talked about this idea of testing, and he talked about really what you alluded to. You have to have buy-in from the gatekeepers, because at the end of the day, if there's no buy-in or they don't hold value in it, you're essentially either collecting data or it's not going to be used because they're not interested in it. And there's got to be some sort of utility in the fact that you've got to look at your resources and what you're able to do. Logistically speaking, can it even work? If you have 3 helpers, it's hard to run a full team on the ice, with work to rest ratios and having different patterns. You have to have the resources for it.
Yeah. So I'll tell you this. I'll give you a little story about that. Just to say about having the gatekeepers buy in and understanding what they want. When I went into my first draft, and I basically sat with the assistant general manager, director of scouting, all these people, and I'm walking in there. I'm going, man, I'm going to impress these guys. I'm like really going to know my stuff. They're going to ask me questions. I'm going to know exactly what's going on. FileMaker Pro is a database type system that from the archives back that Apple used to have. I built my own database in FileMaker Pro for how to, look at the athletes, and, I was doing everything. So what do I think physically? Is there anything? What's their effort level like on a scale of 1 to 5? What's all the metrics? I was pulling in all the stuff from the combine. So I got in a room after they had the combine, and there was a couple of weeks there where we were talking and evaluating people. And now we're in this city, and they're going to have the draft, and they set me up, and there's 20 people around. The hockey years, I mean, this is immense. I played in the NHL. I've been in the NHL, as a strength coach for a year. Right. Wow. For a year. Yep. And I'm sitting there in this room of, legends, and I'm okay. All right. I should be here. And I'm talking to them. The first 3 people that I started talking through, it's just glazed over. They're looking at me like, I'm going, is my information bad? Is my whatever? And they go, yeah. Okay. I get those guys. But what about this guy? So I built my own database. I'd spent all the time at the combine. I'd done all these things. I never got their priority draft order.
Wow.
I spent all this time. And so that was my mistake, my error, to not go in and say, okay, from the top, what is it? How do you want it? How do you want that information presented? I just got crazy gung-ho and started doing a whole bunch of stuff.
So you were looking at physical outputs and not the actual individuals in the draft to look at those physical outputs for the ones that were ranked higher, correct? Does that sound right?
Yeah. So the first 2 guys I put on, they're like, thanks, they'll never play in the NHL.
Reg, that was a big one. Eh?
but I'm sitting there and I'm going to myself, man, I put in, I can't tell you the amount of hours I put building that database, doing that stuff, getting all that stuff running. And I forgot probably one of the most, important questions. Wow. Hey guys, is this how you want it displayed? How do you want it brought across? What's important to you? And that again speaks to it. Stop, observe your area, figure out who the key stakeholders are, get everybody aligned, make sure they know exactly what's going on, and away you go. Because the other thing I've done is I've had coaches, assistant GMs, and GMs, and had separate conversations with each of them, not in the same room. And then you come together afterwards and you're doing stuff, and you're like, why are those 2 guys not really, what's going on there? There's something not vibing with this. Something's not there. And you find out not everybody's aligned, because when, maybe that assistant GM gets with the GM, gets with the coach, those individual conversations happen. It's not exactly the way the conversation was when I had it. Absolutely. So whatever you're going to do, get them all in the room.
So
Get
true.
everybody in a room, figure out what they want. And the goal is not to walk in and tell people what to do. The goal is to walk in and find out how your services, how your personality, your approach can help them get a better team on the ice. Again, this is not solely about bigger, faster, stronger, that individual maximizing it. Now, don't get me wrong. We want all our athletes to be amazing athletes, but our goal is to be a critical, involved piece of the puzzle that is the entire team.
So true. Wow. Very well said, Reg. So I want to make sure I have this accurate. Correct me if I'm wrong. So fast forward a few years, you're in the league, but towards 17 years altogether, did you go through 7 different coaches? Is that accurate? Did I write that? So here's what I have. Ron Lowe, Brian Trottier, Glenn Sather, Tom Rennie, John Tortorella, Alain Vigneault, and David Quinn. Were those all under?
So just the first one I was not.
Okay.
So my first coach was Brian Trottier.
Okay. So 6 different coaches.
Yeah.
That is a recipe for change most of the time, right? And that change can occur from a staff standpoint. It can occur regardless in terms of someone is kept, but the personalities differ. How did you navigate that landscape? How did you handle the change?
Sometimes better than others, I will tell you that.
Okay.
Hindsight is an interesting teacher to go through that. So you never quite know what you're getting into. When I started, I was in Montreal and worked there for a couple of years. I went to school at Concordia and I graduated from Concordia University in Montreal. Love that city, by the way. Not a plug for Montreal, but if you haven't been there, you have to get there.
Beautiful place.
So I'm there and I'm thinking to myself, you know what? This is great. I know the guys, Scott Livingston, who's a legend in the industry. I learned under him when I was a student. I was there. The job that he left to go into the NHL is the one that I took. Ron Rappel ran athletic therapy and that for a long time at the school. Another good friend and colleague and teacher and mentor of mine. And so I went through all of these kind of lessons at the school, and picture, I was probably living maybe a block from the athletics facility. A couple of minute walk, I was in that athletics facility. And then, I find out that this job is available for the Rangers. That's another story unto itself, how I got to that. But anyway, I find out the job's available and they want me to do an interview. And I've done a few different ones. They said, there's one left to do. It's with Brian Trottier. I said, perfect. Only one thing. I said, what's that? He's in Denver. Okay. So I get into the airport in Montreal. I fly to Denver and I land at that airport and I get out of the gate. There he is, a legend, Hall of Famer legend, Brian Trottier.
Oh yeah.
And I meet him, have lunch with him. I'm with him for about an hour, 90 minutes. Went great. Finished the lunch, got back on a plane, flew back to Montreal. So my first interview with a head coach in the NHL was about an hour to 2 hours in the Denver airport that I flew. I flew there for, I don't know how long it takes to get to Denver from Montreal, 5 hours, and then flew back. So that was my thing. But, this interesting thing, I want to bring this across because another key part of anything we do. I mean, we're talking about development systems and how you develop hockey players, the people that are in that realm of coaching elite athletes and young athletes as well, those that are aspiring. Understand that if you're an aspiring coach, you don't get there alone. Not even in the slightest. There are so many people to help you. My story of how I got there, Scott Livingston, I was directly connected to and helped me immensely understand the space and learn how to be a practitioner, and I say practitioner in the sense that, I'm an athletic therapist as well.
Sure.
How do I do that? And yet at the same time, Pete Friesen, who spent a long, long time in the NHL, legend in Hartford and he was all over the place. Pete Friesen played a role in my life that I had no idea at the time. So he comes in, Carolina's playing Montreal. It's in the playoffs way, way back in whatever this was in 2002, or I think it might've been in the spring of 2002, actually. And so he comes in, he's at this hotel. He goes, Reg, pick me up. We're going to go see Scotty and we're going to go have some dinner. So me, Scotty and Pete and Scotty was with the Canadians at the time. And I picked Pete up. Now, Pete, for those that don't know him, is an absolute ball of energy. Like an absolute ball of energy. It's like, there's no on switch. It's just on all the time. Like there's nonstop. And Pete sits in the car. The drive to Scotty's place is in 5 minutes, right? It's 5 minutes away. He starts right in. Oh, you got to get in the NHL. You got to get there. There's a job. It's open. You got to get, and it is just nonstop. It's 5 minutes. 5 minutes. And then we get to Scotty's. I'm like, Pete, I should drop you off and drive straight to New York. Like, you got me revved up. Like, I'm not going to be able to sleep tonight. So we go on and we do all, gets me all revved up. And I start going through some different interviews and all this different things. It wasn't until a few years later that I found out that through no prompting, nothing, nobody asked him, Pete got on the phone with one of the key people in New York and was like, you got to hire this guy.
Wow.
Yeah. And I say that in the sense that whether you're an experienced practitioner, whether you're a young practitioner, have empathy, understand the people around you. And whenever you can help somebody, by all means, help somebody. And it works up the chain, it works down the chain. And we do not get places because we have a fancy title, a car, a thing, a degree, or whatever. We get places because we care about people and we connect with people. And that's how it is. You think about who you want to be around each day when you wake up and how you interact with, and just be that to people. Put out good stuff. And as I say, back to Rammer, give energy to environments. Don't take it. But I had to give some credit out there to Pete because he didn't have to do any of that stuff, and he did.
I've got an interview with him scheduled here early next week. He's a legend. And talk about a ball of energy. How passionate of a person. Talk about contagious. I want to, I want to be in a room with Pete. So I want to pivot a little bit. So your career is you're starting to evolve here in New York. You've had several years now in the New York Rangers hockey club. How did you start constructing, or did you start constructing your performance team or your performance model? Were you able to hire who? If so, what did you look for when you hired? What were the positions that you wanted to fill to create this performance model?
So it's different now, I can tell you that. But back at the time, because when I started, there was pretty much, your conditioning, your medical, and your equipment, right? You pretty much have those three centers.
Yep.
And on the medical side, they have physician support. And if there's a need, so somebody might have a need for a psychologist or a one-off for a nutritionist or whatever it might be, then those things are dealt with kind of like a la carte, right? Like off the shelf kind of on an individual basis. But as we went along, the value of some of those roles became more evident. And the things we were doing, and I say when we were doing, it's a really, really simple recipe that has immense complexity depending on, what you read and the research you have. You're simply trying to understand what stresses and what supports an individual. Now, there's lots of different components to that, but people get stressed and they need ways to support. Sometimes that support is through external help. Sometimes it's through creating a bigger, stronger engine in the way you train. Sometimes it's elements of recovery in the way you eat, in the way you sleep. And then it's understanding that some things that are supportive to some, like family and kids, might be stresses for others.
Wow.
So they're not singular.
Yeah.
Oftentimes we look for, and this is one of the explosions of analytics, we look for simple answers. It's a complex puzzle. We took what is essentially a human condition, a human game, and we tried to put a number to it. And we tried to play that video game type thing, right? Oh, he's a 95. He's 23. That's no good. We need to have the 95ers, even though your entire 100% group is in the top 2% of the entire league. But that's another question. So we went through that process of how do we help support those guys through the stresses that they have? And that kind of brought us in touch with a number of different people. In 2010 to 2012, that whole analytics explosion occurred.
Yep.
Wearables, different things, all that stuff starts to happen. So it grew organically out of those connections. Now, to think about what type of professionals that would come around in 2005 or 6, I think it was, we had our network. I set up a computer underneath the stands at MSG.
Okay.
And connected it right into the network feed, so that they were running an ISO camera, like an isolated camera on a player.
Yep.
And I had heart rate monitors on them. Yeah, this is before the days where that was a problem to do during a game.
Sure.
But that's another thing. And so we were looking at what happens. What is that heart rate response? What is that stuff? Now we didn't know. Obviously high is a lot of stress, low is not. But we didn't know exactly how that was. And then we find out, oh, guys are more stressed. So, well, maybe we should get a sports psychologist around them. And it grew organically around those type of situations to the point where we started to understand that we needed a group of people with purpose, not reactive, but with forward purpose to think in a proactive sense, what should we do for questions, for environments, for expectations, so that those athletes walk in and goes, oh, there's actually people here. And you don't kind of find out till you actually have that issue where you need the surgeon, where you need the intervention. You actually put it in front of them before. And then we had those development camps. So then with the development camps, we started bringing in experts in sleep and psychology and that stuff. So if you walk in now and you said, hey, what do you want? I'm like, well, absolutely. It's pretty simple, right? There's a medical component of the body and there's mind, body, spirit. There's the psychological, there's the physical. Like you can start going through all these different components, right? There's your mechanical, metabolic, internal, external, all these different fancy terms for what type of stress and things you go through. But the reality is, everybody wakes up, they go through a regular routine in the day that is full of habits that take them in one way or the other. Yeah. Those habits generally don't sustain you. Mm-hmm. If you're sustaining because of the stress you go through at that level, you're deteriorating because you're not recovering. Yeah. So what are those habits? So you're going to wake up, you're going to eat. What do you consume? How do you move? And that consume can basically fuel you. It can recover you. What do you do to think about things? There's a lot of stress. How do you sleep? And when you go and say, oh, we need to help somebody sleep, the original thought is get the sleep specialist. No. What is the entirety of what that room is, that environment, that family, the interactions with the club? Like, what is it that is causing that to happen? Yeah. Sometimes a large majority of the intervention might need to be from the sports psychologist, not the sleep specialist. You don't sleep not because you haven't figured out how to set your room up, right? You just might not be able to shut your mind off. Yeah. But maybe the sleep specialist helps you as well. So my experience was that those things weren't there. That big integrated environment didn't really exist. Yeah. We built it on a need by need basis and then learned to transition that into a purposeful, proactive action. So that guys came into development camps and you said, hey, here you go. These are the things.
That's brilliant in so many different ways. But number one, I love this idea of testing things in development camp to see, hey, you can see you have a good sleep specialist. Okay, we might bring he or she into our team, just by testing or beta testing those ideas. Also this idea, and I don't want to take words out of your mouth, stress support. Food, for an example, you can eat poor food. That's a stress. Food high in good quality, it's going to be a supportive. So everything can be viewed through that lens. Yeah. You touched on something about this idea of hockey and numbers, and everyone's got a number. What are your feelings? And I don't want to ask a loaded question, but what are your feelings right now between this idea of technology and trusting your gut? A writer that I like and researcher, Gerd Gigerenzer, out of Max Planck Institute, and he wrote a book called Gut Feelings. And he talks about this idea of overfitting a lot. We collect all this data. And then once we collect it, there's a big difference. We want to interpret that. So something's already happened. There's no more uncertainty. So we're now left with telling a story. And the problem with that is you can take noise and create an algorithm in the future where you're literally gaming the metrics, or it's noise, essentially. You're following a noise pattern. And he made this argument in the book, and it's an interesting argument about this idea of trusting your gut, or heuristics, simple rules of thumb that we can use as practitioners, whether it's return to play, whether it's internal, external workload. What are your thoughts? Are we going one way too far the other direction, meaning like the data, or do we need to be somewhere in the middle, that trust your gut and have that objective information when we need to present it to coaches?
Interesting question. I've lived both.
Okay.
I've lived it when there weren't the numbers, and I've lived it when there were way too many.
Okay.
I think people tend to put numbers up because it's easier. And
Okay.
if you go and you say, hey, I'm evaluating a bunch of different things and my program works. I measured, lower body strength, however you want to do it. I did a vertical jump. I did a sprint. Now you can pick 20 tests, doesn't really matter, but
Sure, sure,
you
sure.
measured it and you say, oh, my program works. They're a better athlete. All right. Are they a better player?
So true. And therein lies the problem. That's the tough. The easy stuff, I say the easy stuff, right? The inputs, the easy stuff or the low-hanging fruit. It's not that it's not important, but taking the scoreboard and rewinding back where that's the really important stuff. Read and react, skating ability, balance, hockey IQ. That's the tough stuff to measure.
So let me give you a story. I want to tell you a little story about this because to be flat out simple, to be very, very simple on this, it's a human game and it's not the hockey. This is a human game. We're playing in a human sport in a human world. And everybody has taken, this is general broad stroke, but a lot have taken a numerical, mathematical, algorithmic approach to what is a human game and a human condition. And they will go and evaluate somebody and make a judgment on somebody that if you take that exact same person and you put them into a different psychological environment, they will be an exceptional or opposite player.
Sure.
So we went into Pittsburgh, and we were down 3-1 in the playoffs. Wasn't looking good. We landed. Everybody got on the bus, and we sat there, and probably sat there for 45 minutes. And one of the guys, through the flight, his mom had passed.
Yeah.
This is the exact same team that had, gone through the season, ups and downs, wasn't stellar, right? Had amazing moments, had not amazing moments, was down 3-1 against a club. And you've got an entire organization, all these players on a bus, driving through a tunnel. Pittsburgh Airport's probably 40 minutes, right, from the rink, from the hotel. They're driving there. The other player had gone, flown back, been with his family, flew back the next day, walks in the building. We go out to play that club. We haven't changed one bit. Maybe induced a little more fatigue because it's, now you're in the 5th game. We haven't changed one bit of athletic ability on that team. Forget hockey ability, of athletic ability. Even hockey ability, nobody got more skillful. Nobody got stronger in that 24-hour period. And Pittsburgh didn't have a hope. The guys went out, ran the table, won the series, went along. We went to the Stanley Cup Finals. So is the most important thing what that physical component is? It's one part. I mean, It definitely plays a part. Your ability to recover is directly related to your, the engine you have. Right? People that are stronger, more powerful, more conditioned can recover better.
Sure.
But there is an extreme element of that psychological connection that people will have, of a coach's ability to connect in with that individual in the group of individuals to get buy-in. That really good coaches have that ability and can take people at certain levels and bring them outside themselves. Now, we'll bring you back to another story. When I was in Montreal, it was the spring of '94. It was the year the Rangers won the Cup. I was not there. I was in Montreal at the time, and it was the first round. I was doing an internship with the Canadiens, and during that series where Montreal played Boston, Patrick Roy went out with acute appendicitis, and it was like, oh boy, everything's over. Right there, this legend, absolute legend, Hall of Famer. He's not playing, and what's going to happen with the team? So he comes out, he ends up in some miraculous way getting, treatments and he's back. Everything subsides after a number of days and missed a couple of games. And now we're back in the forum and he's behind the pipes, or he's between the pipes. Sorry. And it's like, wow, how did this happen? And the energy in the building is unbelievable. And so before the game, everybody gets out there and they call the starting lineup. And they go through the skaters and they get to the goalie and all you hear is numéro 30. You don't hear 33, Patrick. You don't hear anything. All you hear is numéro 30. And now the announcer is still talking He's still talking. The place is pandemonium and screaming. I'm between the benches. I'm 15 to 20 feet from the stands from where everybody is. I turn around, I look, I can't differentiate where the noise is coming from. It is so loud. You can't tell the one guy screamed for another guy. You can't tell any of this stuff. Absolute craziness. For a couple of minutes, you can't hear the announcer talking and he's still talking.
Wow.
That's before the game.
Wow.
I'm between the benches. I look over at Boston. I'm like, oh boy, this is not good. And it's like, and so the game starts, everything happens. It's rolling along. There's a lot of energy. And we're down 2-1. And then we score. I say we, because we're with the Canadians at the time. We score, it's 2-2. We score, it's 3-2. And everything ramps up, just ramps up. The Canadians won that game 5-2. Shots on net, Boston 61.
Wow.
Montreal 15.
Wow.
So when I was a young, super influential, whatever, I was, how do you say that? I can't remember the word, but I was being really influenced by my environment at the time. I'm watching this unbelievable individual completely take over and transform a game. Stopped 59 shots. It was unbelievable. Completely changed the environment of a city, the building, everything. And it was like, oof, I just watched somebody come outside of themselves doing something that they dreamed of, wanted to do, but is it really possible? And it actually happened. It was unbelievable. Ever since then, I was hooked on coaching, athletics, psychology, how that whole environment works. Unbelievable.
So true. It's interesting. Clouds and clocks, right? One's complicated, one's very complex. Team game there's so many working parts and everything. I'm fond of saying, I forget the philosopher who coined it. I think it's Epictetus. No man has ever stepped in the same river twice, for he's not the same man and it's not the same river. It's never the same. It doesn't mean we don't value the objective measures, but it's such a complex game and complicated game.
Hey, can I jump on one thing that you just mentioned there?
Sure.
Because this is key, absolutely critical in coaching philosophy or how this stuff works. And by coaching philosophy, I'm talking about how you interact with, your athletes as well as those that are their key stakeholders that are around you as well.
Sure.
I use the analogy of a sports car. In that you talk about clocks, there's complicated stuff going on inside the sports car. You want it all to work. You want it all to have precision. You want all the fluids to be right. You want everything to work, the pistons, all that type of stuff. It is immensely complicated. You don't show that to the athlete. You don't walk in and say, hey, athlete, I'm unbelievable. Look at this engine. The car hasn't gone anywhere yet.
Wow.
Hasn't even moved.
I'm stealing this one, Reg. I'm stealing the analogy.
Close the hood. I want to see the clean, clear, pristine hood. That's what they see. Nothing complicated, nothing in the way, no obstructions, no distractions.
Yeah,
it is clean and pristine. Water drops on it, goes off. There is immense complicated stuff underneath the hood. You sit behind the wheel, you got a pedal, a shift, and a wheel. That's it, right? It's really, really simple. You complicate it and it gets a problem.
I would imagine too, when you're communicating, especially in the era now of the data, that has to be the same communication, right? It's got to be simple. You got to be able to tell a story and why it's important. And then, hey, this is why it's going to help us.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to pivot if we can. You have a passion for educating, obviously, and I want to make sure you served as the president of the Strength and Conditioning Association of Professional Hockey and played a role in developing the current NHL Entry Draft Combine. Could you expand on that a little bit for us? How did that evolve, and how did that take place?
So I'll start with the first one, the association. So when I think about an association, right, what's the organization? What's the group of people that come together in that professional sense, right? And trying to create a group of professionals that are helping to better the profession, better the careers of those that come in. We started something, and I say we because there was a group of us, but there's a group prior to us that are really, really critical. So Lauren Goldenberg, Pete Twist, and there's another other bunch of group of guys that, it's a topic for another day. But through the late 80s and 90s, these guys largely on their own got together and started trying to help to figure out how do we improve and develop hockey players, and came from a number of different spots. And when I got in the league in 2002, it was really a group of individual guys, right? And Pete Friesen was one, but there was a group of individuals, and getting everybody together was sort of something that evolved slowly over time. Imagine that you're at a combine, and it happened in the basement and ballroom of a hotel in Toronto.
Wow.
And there was 3-4 of us that sat on the couch outside the combine. That might have been the first kind of group, that organization that we got together,
Wow.
and then the next year there was 5, and then there was 7, and then, and it kind of grew a little bit like that. And one of the key players in the whole thing was Roger Takahashi. He's actually been in the league for a long time now as the Vancouver Canucks strength and conditioning coach, and a really good resource and friend. And Tak kept pushing. We got to get together. We need to get, looped together. We got to get there. And Mike Bond, who spent some time in the league, he was a part of that as well. And then Ray Bear, who's a great human being. And there you go. So these guys all were a part of it. And we informally created, that group, that Professional Hockey Strength and Conditioning Association group. And it sort of got to a point where in 2010, we had a little bit more momentum. We talked to the guys running the NHL Combine at the time. And it was good. It was starting to come together. We had a room. And everything started to evolve. We got Gatorade to come, and we got some other sponsors that were there. And so that really around 2010 put us in a situation where Tak ran it. So he was the president. I was the vice president of it at the time. And then, we had a few others. Mike Bond and Ray Bear was involved. And, there's a few other guys that got there. So over those years, Tak had done so much for us, and he stepped back, and I still don't know how he did this with, his family was growing and everything, but he still pulled all that off. Now you run into a situation where we got Mike Potenza, who currently is the president of it. So Mike comes in, and now there's me, and there's Mike, and there's David Good, and Sean Scan comes in, and Mike Kadar at the time. And so you got all these guys, and now it's growing.
That's
and
fantastic.
In 2017, I end up sitting with lawyers, and we end up getting this thing formalized, and we actually formalized that Professional Hockey Strength and Conditioning Association. And it's something that our hope, my kind of vision and passion at the time, that isn't mine alone, shared by the guys, is that creating a vehicle that is able to help educate those that are interested in educating and training hockey players. So who wants to help a hockey player? It doesn't have to be pro, it doesn't have to be any of that, but that's how that group kind of came together. And through that process, I spent a lot of time with a gentleman named Dan Marr, who was a scout, ran that stuff with Atlanta, and then got in and started running things for Central Scouting, right? So we ran the Combine. And at the time, the Combine had evolved with incredibly good intention, with a lot of input, with a group from Norm Gledhill and Ronnie Jamnick from York University. They ran it, right? All their people came in and they ran it when it was in Toronto. And there was a transition that was occurring where that event, the Pagula family had got all the things set up down in Buffalo, and it needed to be close to Toronto because of the offices in New York. And so they really had a whole nice setup there that we were trying to, get connected to. And that the NHL was like, hey, let's get something that's a little more centralized. And there's so many more people in the US, right, than there are in Canada. So I think that helped with a little bit of the immigration. And we're talking a lot of years. This wasn't a one-off, but this is a lot of years of being with the group from York University, with Dan, with everybody else. EJ McGuire, who is, a hockey legend ran that for a long period of time, and was the initial group that helped us through that. We ended up having a lot of conversations with Dan to basically say, okay, we're going to move this down here. This has grown to 25 plus tests. If you're testing upper body strength, there's upper body power, there's bench press, there's a whole bunch of different things. There was a number of ways we tested lower body power. It kind of all grew because there's part research, there was part, the different clubs wanted certain things, and they had a reset. So I was fortunate to be in a position where, I got to spend a lot of time with Dan, a lot of time with all the strength coaches, and became sort of a conduit between the two to help get that process to a much more streamlined event. So when you come in, you're now going through a sequence of days where you have medical, you're going to go through screening, kind of FMSY balance type stuff. You're going to go through aerobic conditioning, and then you're going to go through the rest. Whereas most of that was all done on the same day. So you think of what it used to be like. You used to walk in, you used to go see the doc, you used to go through a bunch of different stuff. And then it was like, there's the gauntlet. And you're doing everything, your VO2, your Wingate, your strength, your fur, you're doing all that on the same day. So it was a process of a lot of people over, a number of years that I was just fortunate to be in the spot to be able to work with Dan and try to bring a good group of people together to streamline that process. And that's kind of how we evolved as a strength and conditioning group and how we evolved through what the combine is. And Mike is positioned this beautifully now where, that group has their own website presence, their own podcast, their own stuff. Like
the SCAPH.
There's some really, through SCAPH. Yeah. So that strength and conditioning group is phenomenal. So I don't know, Strength and Conditioning Association of Professional Hockey. That has a good ring to it. That came out of a bunch of different things,
Well, I think I speak on everyone's behalf, especially the younger coaches, on thanking all of you pioneers for doing this, for continuing to educate and to continue to grow hockey, and specifically the performance parameters involved in it. That's an interesting story, and I learned a ton just from sitting on a sofa with a couple of guys, right? It
was crazy.
Isn't that awesome? I would never have known that if I didn't chat with you. That's unbelievable. Let me ask you, if you were to give me a kind of an elevator pitch on the combine, I get it. I mean, we talked about this before you and I in our discussion. Obviously, the best test is the scoreboard, the requisite. It's an opportunity for young players to see their physical capacities off the ice. Would I sum that up well enough, or am I missing something? If there is something right now, I know the test battery has started to, I know, for example, we have linear position transducers for upper body power. I know that we've toyed around with some different jumps, specifically force plates. Mm-hmm. I would imagine that obviously in a perfect world, which we don't live in, on-ice testing would be great, but we talked about this idea of the logistics. That might be a logistical nightmare with a number of players going through. If you gave me an elevator pitch on the combine today, what would you say to a young strength coach? It's his first combine. Like, what's the purpose of this combine?
It serves many things. That's the challenge, is that it's not one specific thing. We've had many discussions about how to get that on ice. There's been many conversations around, hey, look, we might be the only sport at that level that doesn't evaluate people in the avenue or arena that they actually compete, right? Mm-hmm. But a lot of this is driven by what the managers around the league, what those teams want. That is where this comes from. The central scouting and the NHL Combine is a tool to serve the clubs to help better identify different facets of what will help them draft players. It really is that. So they've spent so long, so many hours going out there and, saying, hey, I've seen this guy play for so long, but are there things that we're missing? And so that combine gives sort of a check to it where you're able to say, oh, okay, now we understand, is there balance? Is there symmetry? Is there something that, is an impediment, might be a red flag into their development? Because the reality of somebody that's 18 is that there's a long way to go.
Sure.
Right? You're not watching somebody and saying, oh, it's the vert, the this, that, it's all there. I mean, you get somebody that's going to train well, they're going to get stronger. Right.
Sure.
All that development that's happening, they're going to get stronger as they go through it. And case in point, you look at an athlete that goes to college from 18 to 22, there's massive changes in the physique and physiology that's going on there. So the combine itself is not designed to go and test somebody to say, oh, based on these metrics, these are the best hockey players. That's not the intent of the combine, right? Yeah. So you have people that are going, oh, VO2, why would I ever do a VO2? Well, aerobic capacity as just a metric, as understanding that gives you an understanding of the engine that they have. Can you improve it? Sure. Yeah. But if you have somebody that's got a 35 or a 60, that tells you a little bit maybe about the work ethic of that individual, the basic of that individual. This is a snapshot in time to be able to understand what is that athletic framework of it. Do we want it to be a little bit more specific? Sure. Like we love to say, hey, if we're going to evaluate instead of, let's say, a T-test, right? That pro agility shuttle, instead of that, maybe we want to do something like that on ice, because the ability to move, the technical ability to use skates on ice is case in point, one of the biggest things about how you're going to be successful. You can have somebody that squats 400 pounds and somebody that squats 225. And the person that squats 225 might be able to be that much more effective and efficient. However, it's just, you got to take a starting point, and everybody's got an opinion. I've heard a million of them, a million. I've had people, very upset people with me that they have to train their athletes a certain way for that event. And I've had others that kind of understand it. And at the same time, we don't want anything to be stagnant in any way. Right. So, and the other part to look at is you've got people that come there that have been on ice, off ice, right? Having finished their season for a week or 2 months.
Sure. Yeah, it's good.
So it's a challenge, but that could speak to, is it at the right time?
Yeah.
Right. So what's the timing of it?
Well, that makes a ton of sense. And that's a beautiful answer. So last question, and I want to wrap it up, but you're currently the director of human performance at Holy Name Medical Center, Teaneck, New Jersey. What are your responsibilities right now on a daily basis with this relatively newer appointment? And then to piggyback that question, what lessons did you take from high performance in the National Hockey League that make you do your job well now?
Oh, the things that I messed up. And a lot of that revolves around what I talked before in communication and expectations. And I've grown through environments where people have generally known who I am, right? Like I've been at the university. I'm there, kind of a known quantity. I've been with the club, and sure, when I got there, nobody knew who I was, but some of the staff did, the coaches, things like they kind of knew that, and they knew the role. They knew exactly what I was doing. So human performance as a department is brand new for the hospital. It was created when I got here. And the idea is to take the lessons and the idea of a structured, centralized system that exists in the pros. How do we develop that integrated professional environment of all those practitioners, from medical and physician and psych to sports psych, all those things? Or how do we take all those people and surround an individual to understand stress and support and how we can make them better long-term? How do we take that, bring it into a community environment that is based in medicine? So it's not like your 24-hour fitness or your other gyms that you come in and it's a la carte, right? If you want to go see a PT or a nutritionist, it's that kind of thing. This is an intentional analysis medically, kind of like you go for a yearly physical, but more robust. And then how do we build along the routine of your day? So how do we deal with what you eat, how you move, and all those other components that I talked about? So it's really understanding that medical baseline evaluation. How do you eat? How do you move? What's the psych component of it? And when you understand those things and you can distill them down simply so that somebody is not sitting there as a client or a patient going, okay, well, the doctor told me this and the personal trainer told me this and the sports psychologist told me that, and I'm going to go climb that mountain. So the sports trainer told me, they're not having to find their way through the weeds of things. The goal is for us to be able to bring that under one centralized place where we can go, this is how you execute your day.
Wow.
And small changes over long periods of time. So it's not something where you're going, oh, let's jump in and just switch everything. You're trying to go in and say, okay, we understand what the landscape is, but you know what? I just want you to switch this one thing in the morning. I want you to have 2 liters, a liter, whatever it is, of water in the morning. I want you to do that the first thing. Or I want you just not to eat after 8 o'clock at night, or switch this type of thing. Don't drink soda, drink that. Like whatever it is, it's small changes that are effective, but they're also realistically capable of happening, right? Because the other part about any type of and you think of like a health, wellness, well-being type of thing, is that if you come in and you say, oh, we got the answer for you, there it is. And even if it's 2 pages, right? Even if it's 2 pages, it's a shift and a change in every aspect of your life. What are the chances that's going to happen? So you might sit there and do the liquid diet, right? And you might take all the different supplements and things and pills and shakes and all that type of stuff. How long can you sustain that? You just shifted 50% of your day. Anyway, go ahead.
No, it's just interesting. I say the aggregation of marginal gains. People like to use that catchy phrase, but I do believe it's true. I remember, and I'll use the company because I think they're fantastic what they do. Precision Nutrition. A while back, I was educated in their systems. And,
well, of course, he's from Canada. That's
there you go. And I'll never forget. We had a habit. every 2 weeks that we would get emailed to us. And if the habit wasn't difficult, or if it was too difficult for you at the time, you could email your coach back and they'd say, hey, listen, well, how about changing it just a little bit? Would that be better for you? Long story short, I remember like my first 3 or 4 habits. I'm like, what is this? Like, really? Okay, I can take fish oil. That's all you want me to do? But as you see the habits stack and you see it's psychology 101, like it's intentional habits snowballed over time. And the key word that you used is sustainability. If you cannot sustain it, you're not going to succeed at it.
To jump on that, I've had a lot of people that generally it's in their coaches, their parents, they're in that space, right? And they're kind of like, well, I've always wanted to get healthier or better. What should I do? And I'm like, you just got to get to the gym. They're like, all right. And they're waiting because they're looking at me. They're going in their head, all these players that I've trained, all this stuff and whatever. So they're like, I must be a guru of something. I'm like, what? I'm just a person here. I'm just trying to, whatever. We're just trying to help people. And so they're thinking that I'm going to impart some wisdom of, you have to do a trap bar deadlift. And before you do that, you better have a tendo unit attached to the side and it better be a pointed. I'm like, they're thinking I'm going to come out with something and then tell them the rest period and the device and the tool and the wearable. And I'm like, just go to the gym. What do I do? I said, you walk on a treadmill, you get on a bike. It doesn't matter what you do, but you're going to go to the gym and you're going to get on a piece of cardio. And they're looking at me, they're going, that's the New York Rangers strength coach guy. What the hell does he know? And I'm like, you know what? It's all about you getting in the car, going through the routine and getting to that building. That is it. I want you to do that for 2 weeks so that 5 days a week, you physically get yourself out of whatever your habit is, wherever you are, and you get to the gym. I don't care if you walk around and talk to people. I don't care what you do. You need to get in the habit that going through that action of being there, you're used to it. And when there's people that I've dealt with that they work with, people that have really like weight issues, right? And they'll go in and they'll say, okay, you've got 60 days. And if you do what I want you to do for 60 days, then we'll think about it. I'm like, okay, what do you want me to do? You're going to drink 2 liters of water a day. Like, okay, what else am I going to do? No, that's what you got. Don't worry about any other nutrition. You're going to do that. What's the second thing? Let's take me to your work. Okay, see the parking lot? You're going to park in that parking space, which is the furthest one from the building every single day. Who are the closest people to you here? Okay, great. You see all these people, these 5 people? All right. If you see him not park in that spot, that's the farthest one, you tell me and I'm never going to work for you again. And they make that person go through the habits of simply parking in a spot, drinking water. Doesn't matter what they are. You pick them. Super, super simple. And you get people just to simply get that shift. And all of a sudden you're there and you're going, man, I just ran on the treadmill. I lifted weights. I did what, it's not the program. It's not the thing. It's getting something into that habit. Now, don't get me wrong. When you get somebody that's at a higher level, there is an art and a science and a mix to exactly how you can get somebody to be elite. That is true. And there are certain things with force plates and wearables and other things that are incredibly effective for those individuals that need them. But when you're dealing with transitioning, as you said, from that high level environment to the community environment, you're trying to implement change that are small shifts into somebody's daily routine. And that's atomic habits. That's literally what those habits are.
100%. Our guest today has been Reg Grant. Reg, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast.
Oh, we're done? Oh, come on. Man.